Sean, welcome to the AI Adoption Podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time to come to speak to me and my listeners, and I'm very much looking forward to our conversation. Before we kind of get started, could I just ask you to introduce yourself and the agency, please?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for having me. It's great to be here. So my name's Sean. I'm the Chief AI and Innovation Officer at Omnicom Media Group in the UK. Omnicom is one of the largest advertising groups in the world. We have lots and lots of different businesses and lots of areas of kind of marketing and advertising. And I work in the media side of it, which is all about how we help our clients kind of plan and buy their advertising campaigns to make sure that they're getting the most value for their money and they're reaching the audiences that they want to reach.
Great. And I mean, the advertising industry is going through a significant amount of change as a consequence of AI. Could you kind of highlight what some of the changes are that are being driven by the introduction of generative AI?
Yeah, it's a really, really exciting time at the moment in kind of marketing and advertising. And as anyone who's been paying attention to generative AI technology in the last couple of years will know, it's moving at an incredible pace. And, you know, very early on, a couple of years ago, McKinsey did some research and they looked at the different areas of the economy and different industries that would be impacted by generative AI. And marketing was right at the top of that list. And we started to see that come through in our industry quite early on in terms of the creative work and the generation of images and video and audio and all of those kind of creative applications of generative AI are quite widely used now. And so that is quite prevalent within the industry. It helps a lot with the production when you're kind of coming up with ideas and you're producing kind of first drafts and scamps of things. And we've even seen it come through into the kind of final product as well that have been consumer facing. So there've been adverts by Coca-Cola, there've been adverts by Toys R Us, and quite a few others where they've actually used generative AI in the final product, whether that is images or whether that is video as well. So on the creative side, generative AI has had quite a big impact and it's had quite a big quick impact as well. On the media side, which is the other kind of big side of the industry, we've been using AI for a very, very long time. We've had lots and lots of different applications of machine learning, but generative AI's impact has been relatively slow compared to the creative side of the industry. But we're now starting to see generative AI being used for some of the things that we do on the media side. And that's starting to come through in terms of how we might do research, because it's a very, very helpful research tool. It helps us when we're thinking about the different audiences that we're trying to understand better and how we can generate insights around those audiences. And things like synthetic data are starting to come into the industry, which is really, really exciting. And obviously, one of the things that impacts a lot of different businesses across all industries with generative AI is the kind of operational side of the business. So we're seeing the impact of lots of those tools in our kind of day-to-day working practices starting to come through now, where we're starting to get more adoption. People are finding more use cases for it internally, and it's starting to drive a bit more of an efficiency and automation within the business as well.
And in terms of that, I mean, a number of organizations are using AI to drive efficiencies and to automate traditional manual processes, and a number of organizations are using it to kind of remove what are generally referred to as kind of mundane tasks. But is this really just about efficiencies and automation, or do firms need to start thinking about what capabilities they can build for the future?
Absolutely. I think it's very, very easy with this technology right now to default to the idea of efficiency and automation and stripping out tasks from a business. The reality is doing that is actually quite difficult because a lot of businesses and a lot of industries are very specialized. I don't think you can expect to just be able to log into something like ChatGPT and for it to automatically be able to know your business, know your industry, know your processes, and be able to, you know, out of the box, be able to automate specific tasks. So there's actually a lot of building that needs to be done around this technology to allow it to be able to automate and help you with tasks and help you kind of refine processes. But that is kind of like step one for me. I think the most exciting thing about this technology is the new capabilities that we can be building with it. It is a general purpose technology. It's much, much more like the internet as a whole rather than any other technology we've seen for the last 20 or 30 years. And I think that we're still figuring out what can be done with it. And the way I try to simplify this is that the generative AI models, the large language models that we have, are quickly becoming essentially a piece of intelligence that is technology based. And so anything where we can apply intelligence is an area that we can apply this technology. And the answer to that is obviously everywhere. But then how you actually apply that technology is more often or not quite a large kind of engineering problem. And that's what I mean when I say, you know, a lot of building needs to be done around this technology, not just to be able to realize the efficiencies that you could find from it, but also to be able to build new capabilities with it as well.
And could you give us some examples of what these new capabilities might look like? What are these emerging capabilities from your perspective?
So talk about a project that I'm doing at the moment, and it comes back to something I mentioned earlier, which is around synthetic insights. So um, these large language models are trained on the internet. They're trained on all of the data that's available on the internet. And it turns out that when you train a model on the internet, it has a huge amount of knowledge inside it, but it's also very, very good at taking on different personalities. So one of the things that people were playing around with when ChatGPT first launched was asking ChatGPT to pretend it was a pirate or pretend it was some other kind of character. And it was very, very good at then talking in that character's voice. And one of the downsides, though, is that when you've got a technology that's trained on the whole of the internet, it tends towards the average quite a lot, which means that there's a great trick you can do where you ask any large language model, whether it's ChatGPT or Anthropic's Claude or Google DeepMind's Gemini, ask it to pick a random number between 1 and 10. It will virtually every single time come up with 7. And if you then ask it to pick another random number after it's given you 7, it will always come up with either 2 or 3. And then if you ask it again, it will always then come up with an 8 or a 9. And anyone can try this, and it is so reliable. And it just shows you that these models do tend towards the average quite a lot. They give you the kind of typical average answer. So we've got these two things with large language models. They're very, very good at taking on different types of personalities, but they're also incredibly average at the same time. And these are two things that we can use when trying to use synthetic data to generate insights. So we're working on a project at the moment to do this. We're trying to create a panel of 1,000 synthetic consumers, and we can then use that for research. So we can survey that 1,000 synthetic consumers. We can ask them to participate in qualitative research groups. We can put advertising in front of them and ask them to react to it and give us feedback on it. And we're just starting to build this right now. And it'll actually be based on 1,000 real consumers that we will have interviewed. And it's built on top of some research that was done by Stanford University and Google DeepMind in the US last year. And that, for me, is quite an advanced capability. We're effectively taking a large language model and asking it to pretend that it's one of these 1,000 people, and we're giving it the information about these 1,000 people to then do that. And the research this is based on says that, you know, when you try and do this, it is about 85% accurate in saying what the real human it's based on would say, which is obviously not as good as 100%, but it is a trade-off that I think is worth it for us to allow our teams to have instant access to this sort of consumer research at a very low cost. So this is an example of a new capability that we can build with generative AI. And what it does is two things. It hugely cuts down on the time and cost it takes to do research. So it's an example of efficiency driving within a business. But the upside to that is it gives everyone access to it, which means that we can find insights a lot more readily on all of the briefs and the campaigns that we work on our clients in a much deeper way than we've been able to before with traditional desktop research. So it's also going to enhance what we do for our clients as well. And that you know is a very sophisticated piece of technology that we're building, but it is a great example of how you can leverage this technology if you push it in the right direction.
But in some ways, for me, marketing and advertising was always kind of going after something which was going to be unique, making sure that you bring people in and make the product or the service very attractive. But if using synthetic data in this context kind of drives to the average, is the sector is the marketing agency likely to kind of lose out on those insights that you get kind of more at the outliers rather than at the average?
Absolutely, and that's why we're kind of researching this right now. And there's quite a few different providers out in the market who do synthetic insights, but they
Mhm.
do it with 100% synthetic insights. So they'll create personas purely from the large language model, and that's why we're following this research from the US, where they've actually based this on real humans. So our idea is that by basing it on real human data, we can pull it apart from the average, and that will allow us to get those kind of deep, interesting insights that make really, really powerful advertising campaigns. So that's why we're taking a slightly different approach.
And will that then be backed up with focus groups in the traditional sense, with some proper human beings, or is this just going to be completely synthetic?
So it's going to be completely synthetic once we have done all of the real consumer interviews. But the bit that we're working on right now is the really interesting bit, which is how do you validate that this is
Mm.
actually working and that this is accurate and that it's representing those original humans properly?
Yes.
And so we're doing a few different kind of validation tests on this to make sure that that happens. And there's quite a few things you have to test. You have to test that the synthetic panel that you've built can accurately represent the data that you're giving it from the real human interviews. You have to test that the synthetic panel can represent reliably things that aren't in the original data by inferring what that real human would have said.
Mm.
And you also have to test that the panel is able to consistently and reliably give you the same answers over time, because you don't want something that degrades. So we're in right in the middle right now in figuring out how you actually validate all of this once we've got that data and we've got these agents set up. So that's a really exciting part of this at the moment. And to be honest, is why I'm still talking about this as a piece of research, because we have to validate that this works before we put it out into a commercial environment.
Sure. And you just used a word that it makes me gets my antennae going, my AI antennae anyway, and that is agents. Because clearly the wave of agentic AI or the use of AI agents, I think is just getting going, and you might see that differently, but I think it's kind of just getting going. Um, do you think AI agents are just one thing, or is it agentic AI just one thing, or do you see it as being different levels, different kinds of things?
Hmm. Yeah, I definitely see it as being different kinds of things and different levels. And um, the term agents is an incredibly important one, but it's also a term that is used very broadly to mean lots of different things. So I find it quite useful to try and define what an agent is and what it isn't when we're talking about it, because some people refer to agents as things that are just prompts, like pre-packaged prompts with access to a very specific data set. Some people might call that an agent. I tend to err towards the side that an agent is something that can actually go and do something for you. So
Mhm.
an agent is something that has access to tools, it has access to the internet, and it can go and do things on your behalf. So with my definition of an agent, I think there is the start of a progression towards something that is really incredibly capable. And where we're at right now is that when you think about agents in terms of my definition, something that can actually go and do something for you, we've just towards the end of last year, beginning of this year, started to see the first glimpses of this. So there are different deep research features that ChatGPT has, that Anthropic Claude has, that Google's DeepMind has in Gemini. That's a very kind of early type of agent. It is something where you give it a research problem and it will go and research that for you online. So that's actually doing something. It's going out, it's gathering lots of information, it's bringing that back, and it is constructing a research response around that. It's a very, very early type of agent. And that's something that I call a kind of level 3 agent, because it is doing something quite sophisticated. And we've had a couple of levels of agents before where, something like ChatGPT, the kind of base version, is able to answer questions. It's not really doing anything, but it is asking questions. So that's where we are now. What we're seeing in some of the research previews from the large frontier AI companies at the moment are agents that can use a computer like a human can. So there's lots of demonstrations of this. OpenAI has something called Operator. Anthropic has something called Computer Use. Google DeepMind have got their own project on this as well. And these are agents that can use the computer. So they can see the screen and they can move a cursor around and they can click on things and they can write and type and they can copy data and move it from one place to another and do lots of different things. So these are quite exciting because they obviously open up the idea that these agents can do lots of different things. So it's not just doing a narrow thing like deep research online. It's using a computer in a general way like humans can. So it can do lots and lots of different things with that computer. And these will probably be coming to consumers, I think, around the end of this year, beginning of next year, and will start to be adopted. And that is really what I'm thinking of as kind of the next level of agents. Now, the interesting thing about these agents is that they're very good at the moment at doing very small, quick tasks. So they might be able to do something that takes 1 minute, or they might be able to do something that takes 2 or 3 minutes. And what we've seen over the last few years is a trend where the amount of time that an agent can reliably do something for is doubling about every 7 months. So the average right now is a model or an agent can do something that takes about 15 minutes reliably. And if you continue the trend that we've seen over the last few years forward, where you get to is in about 2027, 2028, agents should be able to reliably do tasks that would normally take a human about a day. And then when you get to 2030, because this is compounding and it's accelerating, you get to a point where agents can reliably do things that would normally take a human a week. Now, that's obviously quite a complicated task or series of tasks. But it's not just the fact that it can do those reliably and it can do that volume of work. It's the fact that it will do it in minutes rather than days or weeks as well. So we're seeing a really rapid increase in terms of their capabilities and their reliability, but also this is shrinking the amount of time it takes to do tasks. Because when you ask an agent to do a task that would normally take a human a week, it will probably be able to do it in an hour. And that's really exciting.
But it's exciting, but it's also at one level quite mind-blowing because if you take the amount of work that can then be done in that period, it also you can see that potentially there's a massive increase in the volume of cases, instances that can be processed in that period of time. But that just strikes me as there is a huge need for having very clear guardrails, very clear controls almost, because help me work this out, Sean, because if you can if a human in a week deals with, and I had this conversation very recently with someone else, but if a human in a week can put through, say, 1,000 cases of whatever, but now this AI agent can do those 1,000 cases, but in an hour, which means in a week, it's doing tens of thousands of these cases. Then if there's bias, in that decision-making process, in that algorithm, even if the same bias exists with the human, because all humans are biased, it's dealing with 1,000 in a week. Here you're talking about 1,000 in an hour. That bias can just spread exponentially. How do we deal with this? What kind of guardrails do you think need to be put in place?
It's the most important question I think we need to start trying to answer right now, because the technology is getting so capable so quickly.
Yeah.
What we haven't figured out yet is what the interaction model is for humans with this kind of a technology. And it's something that I was actually talking to some colleagues about this week, because we're obviously exploring ideas around how agents can help with different processes and tasks within our business. And the reality is that I think that there are certain tasks that are low risk and low value that you absolutely would feel comfortable giving to an AI agent to go and do. And you might even be comfortable doing that when they're not 100% reliable as well, because it's low value and it's kind of low risk. But a lot of things that we do in our jobs, and especially in the public sector and the private sector, are things that aren't necessarily low value or low risk, because if they were, we wouldn't be adding a lot of value to the economy. Yeah. So the question then is, for your kind of high value, high risk tasks, what is the interaction model for an agent going off and doing parts of that task? And what is the interaction model for it coming back and making sure that the human in control of that agent is happy with what it's doing and that the quality of the output is where it needs to be? And to your point, that no unnecessary bias is being added to that process. And that's the thing we've got to figure out. We might have technology that's capable of doing a task that would normally take a human a week in 5 years' time. But how often do we need it to come and check back in with us to make sure that it's doing it correctly? Yeah. How often do we need to see what it's doing to make sure it's being reliable and it's not introducing any bias? And that is, I think, one of the biggest questions that we have to figure out about this technology over the next 5 years. How do humans and machines work together so that this acceleration and this capability can be adopted responsibly?
Yeah, and I think that for me, that responsible word is really important. It's how look, adopting this technology is adopting any technology is never easy, but adopting this technology really does require some very strong governance, some really detailed focus on organizations being responsible. Sean, you've referred to these various levels of agentic AI. Um, and you talked about, if I understood it correctly, kind of the lowest level, kind of being where the LLMs are at the moment, where you go in, you ask it a question, or you give it a prompt, and it gives you a response. I would say that, if I've understood it correctly, that's kind of at the base level. Let me go to the other end, or take you to the other end. What's the highest level then of agentic AI? What's that capability at the higher level, or the highest level in your view?
Yes. So this is something that all of the frontier AI companies have been talking about over the last 12 months. And it's this idea that over the next 5 to 10 years, and the kind of predictions vary in terms of when this will happen, but at some point in our lifetimes, we will see AI models that are capable of not just doing tasks for weeks on end, but are capable of coordinating other agents to do other tasks. And this idea that an AI agent will be able to operate at the level of an organization, that is what a lot of AI companies are now aiming to build. So not just able to go off and do tasks on its own, but also to be able to coordinate other agents that are off doing tasks on their own. And that is very difficult for us to get our heads around, I think, because we've never seen anything like that kind of a technology before. And it doesn't exist yet, but is, according to these frontier AI companies, likely to come in the next 5 to 10 years. And that is a very, very strange concept. And the implications of it are very, very difficult to understand. Because if you have got a technology that is incredibly cheap, because this technology's cost is coming down exponentially at the same time as its capabilities are going up exponentially, it has the potential to have a massive impact on our economy. It has a potential to have a massive impact on society, and could genuinely shake things up in the same way, if not more, that things were shaken up in the Industrial Revolution. And no one can predict how that will go.
I'm going to ask you a difficult question, particularly as you've just said, no one can predict. And I agree, predicting in this space is incredibly difficult. But what would you say might be some of those effects on, say, society and on businesses?
Yeah. So I can't predict, but I can give you a point of view. And
Please.
I'm an optimist. So my point of view will always be optimistic. And on the point about prediction, it's worth actually saying that OpenAI recently hired their first chief economist to try and figure some of this stuff out, because they,
Yeah.
you know, expectedly so, kind of feel a lot of responsibility around this because they're driving the technology quite hard. But where I would like to see this go is, first of all, I'd like to see this happen gradually. I don't think we should hope for a hard shock on this. I don't think we want to be in a situation where suddenly a capability is released into the world and it can do the work of a whole organization, and we're scrabbling around as an economy, as a society, to try and work out how we deal with that. So we kind of want to gradually get towards that over time. And there are a few things that I am given hope by, that I see that might help us get there. So the first
Mm.
thing is, there's been a lot of testing over the last few years about the idea of 4-day working week. And you could see how that could progress from a 5-day working week to a 4-day working week, to gradually over time transitioning to something where people might not have to work as much as they have historically, because we have got AI able to do a lot of that work on humanity's behalf, not on an individual's behalf, but on humanity's behalf. So I think there is a road where we can transition to that, as opposed to it being a hard kind of shock. The flip side of that is the economy. So what does it actually mean to the economy if a lot of the work that needs to be done can now be done by a technology that costs very little, as opposed to the high capital cost of human labor? And there's really two sides to this that are very, very different. And that is the side of kind of manual physical work versus knowledge work. So we are going to take a much longer time getting to a point where we can automate manual physical work, because that requires robotics. And the capabilities of robotics is lagging behind the capabilities of the large language models, because the large language models are what's powering the kind of modern robotics technology stack. But I don't think it will take too long. It might be 5 years behind. It's not going to be kind of a generation behind. So the first thing that will hit us will be the knowledge work side of the economy. And as you alluded to earlier, I think there is the opportunity for a gentle ramp towards that, because what we will see is AI technology that is able to do increasingly longer, more complicated tasks. And to your example earlier, you might go from being able to clear 1,000 cases in a week to clearing 10,000 cases in a week to clearing 100,000 cases in a week. And so I think that will hopefully kind of gradually ramp up as well. And on the physical side, we are already starting to see that ramp. There was an interesting news article yesterday where Amazon announced that they just deployed their 1 millionth robot in their warehouses, which kind of blew my mind. I didn't realize they had that volume of robotics happening. I knew they had a lot in their warehouses, but 1 million is quite a substantial amount. And that's in a closed, kind of structured environment like a warehouse. But we will see robotics evolve a lot more rapidly. So I do hold a lot of hope that we will see a slower ramp to this, and it not just being a sudden shock, which will allow us to adapt. It will allow us to put policies and regulations in place. It will allow us to put support structures in place for people as well. But when I say slow ramp, I'm talking about 5 to 10 years. I'm not talking about 20 to 50 years. So it's a relative slow ramp compared to the technology space.
Yeah. And when you think about, going from a 5 to a 4 to even a 3-day work week, I mean, work defines who we are in many ways, doesn't it? It defines kind of what we can do. It provides us with an income that allows us to do the other things that are non-work related, that are pleasure related, if you like, or family related. This is a very significant change in social structures and society, which I'm not sure the policymakers have quite got their heads around either. So
No, that they haven't. But I also, again, I'm an optimist and I have a lot of faith in humanity. And I think that I know from my own personal experience, if I suddenly had an extra day or 2 days or 3 days free every week, I know what I would be doing with that time. And some of it would be kind of entertainment and pleasure and things that bring me joy. But some of it would be work that adds economic value, because I enjoy that stuff. So I will probably, if I was in that situation, I would still do a lot of coding. I would still do a lot of writing and thought leadership around AI because I'm very passionate about it. And these are things that I would still put out into the world. And because I don't necessarily need an economic return on it, there's a lot lower risk for me spending more time on it, but it doesn't mean it doesn't add economic value to society. So I think that that is an incredible future that we could build for ourselves, where there's a better balance, and also it frees people up from the financial constraints that they might have to be able to do economically valuable work that they either wouldn't prioritize or they wouldn't have been paid enough for it to be sustainable and that they're passionate about. And I think that could cause quite a lot of positive change in society. But that's the optimist's view.
Yes. And in terms of agentic AI, and you've talked about this 5 to 10 year time horizon, how do you think business models will change in that time, Sean?
Mm. Um, this is where I'm slightly less optimistic and much more realistic in my point of view. I think when you look at the history of technology over the last 20, 30 years, what you have seen is a lot of cycles in business
Mhm.
where there have been legacy incumbents that haven't been able to adapt and adopt new technologies quickly enough, and they have been disrupted by new entrants coming into the market. And we've seen that a few times now over the last 20 or 30 years. That's not just a one off that happened with the internet. We saw it again with mobile phones and apps on phones. You know, we've seen it again with kind of social media and how it has disrupted lots of other sectors as well. And you know, the entertainment sector is going through a huge disruption at the moment as people change how they consume content. You know, we're seeing these waves and cycles of disruption over and over again. So I think that the reality is that a lot of incumbent businesses, especially big ones, will find it very difficult to adapt and to adopt this technology quickly enough, and will be disrupted by new entrants coming into the market who are built on top of this technology from the start. Now, we're still really early. You know, ChatGPT was only launched 2.5 years ago. There are a few companies out there that have built a business on top of a generative AI model, but a lot of them have found themselves replaced by ChatGPT's general capability as it improves over time, because they've just built a very light wrapper around a large language model. But there are other businesses that have spun up that are genuinely providing services to people building with large language models and trying to support the ecosystem and the infrastructure, which I think will continue to add a lot of value. But if I think about my industry, so the marketing industry, the advertising industry,
Mhm.
I do think that we're more likely to see new entrants come in and disrupt rather than a number of the incumbents figuring this out and being able to move quickly enough, which is a challenge. Obviously, I'm in a position where I'm in a large incumbent business and I'm trying to drive that innovation forward, and I will do everything I possibly can to make sure that that doesn't happen. But history tells me a different story, and this technology, more than anything, is moving so quickly. I think a lot of large incumbent businesses will find it even harder than they have in the past to keep up and to keep the new entrants at bay.
Sean, thank you so much for joining me on the AI Adoption Podcast for this episode. You have provided some really interesting insights into how generative AI, agentic AI, is going to roll out into organizations. I like the optimism because I think that's really important, particularly as I think it is going to raise some very challenging issues for organizations, businesses, not just in the marketing and advertising sector, but I think across the board are going to have to deal with. And I love your clear-eyed, pragmatic approach. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed it. So, yes, thank you again.